Hello, YouTube internet friends. It's Thorn, and is it weird to see me sitting outside when I'm doing videos? Maybe it is. Hi. I'm sitting here with one of the neighborhood stray cats. She doesn't belong to anybody, and I've been working on her all year as far as getting near me, kind of being friendly, getting used to people. And it's taken a bit over a year of work. We've recently been able to trap and spay her. So she's out here keeping me company. Yes. Say we're getting there. We're getting there. Anyway, I was thinking about, it's kind of appropriate that she's sitting here because I'm thinking about something that I'd said on Instagram earlier this week about how social media tends to make us look kind of one-dimensional. Like, I think sometimes, especially for folks who maybe have larger platforms or who use their social media accounts as kind of like an outlet for a particular thing, in this case, witchcraft, it's really easy to forget that, people are complex and they've got lots of things about their lives and their personality and their work and their families and things just kind of outside of what we might see in an Instagram post or a YouTube video. And just kind of thinking about some of the pressures that surround that. For me, I think it's one of the reasons why I find social media, especially Instagram, so stressful sometimes. Because there's this sort of perception that whatever we're doing, even if we're not like necessarily selling something, like your account is your brand and you have to be consistent with the filters you use or with the foot you put forward or whatever. And that's more true if it is a business account, if you are actually selling something. So weird to think about. But in 2021, I'm super into New Year's goals, not necessarily resolutions, but sort of like laying plans for the coming year. And in 2021, I really wanted to focus on other parts of my life just because I've been going so like full force into not just witchcraft stuff, but particularly writing about witchcraft, right? Like writing a book, marketing a book, building a social media following so that I can then better promote that book, all of those kinds of things that go along with being a public witch and an author. And I've really let other parts of my life not necessarily be neglected, but it's so easy to let things slide without even really realizing that you're doing it. And my goal for 2021 was to kind of refocus on some of those things, including, my personal practice of witchcraft, because as I've discussed in other videos, and I think a lot of other YouTube creators have talked about and elsewhere, there's a big difference between what gets circulated on social media and what people are actually doing in the privacy of their own homes and ritual spaces. Sometimes those things are very drastically different. I think sometimes we forget that whatever sort of witchcraft we're practicing, it's ultimately a private experience, a personal experience. Even in a coven setting, folks working together to experience kind of a central capital M mystery, it's still something that is very much dependent on the individual's perception of the thing and experience of the thing. And I think we pressure each other to like make altars look a certain way and make our practices look a certain way and our spells all kind of look the same and whatever, that it's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that by itself, but it just means that our understanding of what witchcraft entails is sometimes quite narrow, even if we're describing ourselves as being different kinds of witches and having this wide variety of practices. It tends to kind of have this homogenous sort of look on the internet. So wanting to focus on like what I'm actually doing as a witch, but also what I'm doing more generally as a writer, and as a musician, and as a student, and as a wife, and all of these other things that I am. And I'm thinking about like why I started practicing witchcraft to begin with, or maybe that's not even fair, but perhaps why I've continued to practice witchcraft over the years. And so much of that has been about improving my whole life, right? Creating a sense of not just balance necessarily, but meaning in my life as a whole. Sometimes I think we tend to think of witchcraft, I'm putting myself in this category too, okay? We tend to think of witchcraft as a thing that we do kind of all by itself. Like you can be good at being a witch or something, and that's all that matters. But so much of witchcraft, maybe most of witchcraft, is about being pragmatic and looking at a whole person and a whole life. How do you improve everything about your life, how you interact with other people, your finances, your health, your relationships with other, right? Like all of those things, the things that we do spells for, the things that we do rituals for, like whether or not we're even talking about relationships with other worlds or contact with gods, kind of on a more like, lower on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like making our lives better as a whole. And I'm just trying to keep that in mind and appreciate where my life goes well and how witchcraft has either created space for that to be the case or enhanced it, or sometimes just drawn my attention to how good certain parts of my life are, or conversely, where they could be improved with additional effort. So, I don't know, like I'm really curious about what other folks think about that. In my particular tradition of witchcraft, we have the concept of the priest, right? Like I am a theist, my tradition is largely theistic. I mean, I'm using that term kind of in the broadest sense possible, but the practice of my particular kind of witchcraft is valuable sort of in and of itself because you're serving gods and a community, and you can do that successfully and it can be enriching. And you're not necessarily looking at other parts of your life, right? Like you could devote your life to being a Gardnerian high priestess or whatnot, and that could be kind of the main thing about your life, and that would be wonderful and totally valid. But that's only one kind of witchcraft and one way to do witchcraft, and I think for a long time I thought that was going to be who I was, like that was going to be the thing that was valuable about my life, and that still certainly is a central valuable thing about my life. But in 2021 I think probably because of the pandemic, right, like my coven isn't meeting, I think most covens aren't meeting, we're sort of renegotiating what it means to be practicing a tradition while we all can't be in a room with each other. And that's caused me to look at how being a priestess has played out in my life as a whole. And I feel like that probably sounds like an obvious thing I should have been doing the whole time, but I really don't think it was. And I think maybe that might be true for other folks too. So I wanted to just chat about it. Yeah, I'm excited to think about other things and how I can use my magical practice to augment those things. Like, what does it look like as a musician if my practice becomes a magical act? What does it look like if my relationships with non-witches become something that I think about in magical terms? I don't know, like thinky thoughts. Anyway, I'd be curious what other folks think about that. If your witchcraft is something that you feel you can easily incorporate into other parts of your life, if it's ultimately about enriching your life as a whole, or if witchcraft is kind of like, I wanted to say escape hatch, but I feel like that kind of comes off with a negative connotation that I don't intend. Maybe like a refuge from other parts of life. I think witchcraft can potentially do all of those things. So anyway, I hope you all are well, and I will see you next week.